somebody screws up, right? And during the day, it's usually one of three things. They don't care, they don't know how, or they're not capable, right?
If a founder of a restaurant, they want to think about scaling across multiple units, where would you tell them to start and what should they avoid?
To me, it was really important before I grew that I put systems in place to scale the culture. And that can be done. It can be done, it really is by.
Most of your employees are teenagers. How do you then go about getting them to care?
The way I think of it is I think of our business as a school, and that's the structure that we put in our training.
You have less than a 25% staff turnover. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's incredible. I would love to hear what behaviors you have that drive that level of retention.
One of the key things that made a difference was
Nick, thank you so much for joining us. I think one of the things that really caught my eye as I was doing some research for this was thinking about just how hard it is to, as a restaurateur, restaurant operator, to attract and retain staff. And I saw a crazy stat, which is why I really wanted to make sure that we could talk here because it was amazing. You in your restaurants, you have two locations in the Chicago area.
Correct.
You have less than a 25% staff turnover. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep.
That's incredible. I mean, I would love to hear what systems do you have, what behaviors do you have that drive that level of retention? Because I think a lot of restaurant operators who hear that go, "Wow, how does he do that?" Can you dive in a little bit there?
100%, Andy, and I just want to share my gratitude and honor to be here. I'm really excited to be here and share what I know. And then I felt even better when I saw that you're wearing the same shirt I have. So now I really feel good. Everybody could see that, but it's really, I like your taste in clothes, so appreciate that. To get to your point, yeah, when I first started, yes, I have two restaurants. When I first started, I had one. Was half the size of what it is now, right? And yes, I had I had higher turnover when I first started. I came from the construction industry. I was, I am a carpenter. I guess that never goes away. But but you can imagine my leadership style as a foreman with guys in construction was a little different than restaurants with more diverse in females and a way more diverse. So I really, to me, it was always important that I think has made this one of the key things that made a difference was I wanted work to be meaningful. So I wanted the job to be like, wait a second, this isn't just a job. I feel connected to what I'm doing at Nick's Pizza and Pub, the impact I'm having on these guests, on each other, on the community is something that feels important to me in my life. And I honestly had no clue how to do that when I first started. But about a year into it, I started asking myself that question because I worked for a bunch of companies and, I had bad experiences like most people and good experiences. And I was like, I care why I opened this restaurant because about the impact I wanted to have on the community. I was clear about my own impact, but I was like, how do I create a place where people enjoy coming to work, and when they leave, they're like, it's not, it wasn't bad. I actually look forward to coming back tomorrow. So in the biggest picture of that, that's really the mindset I started with. So I would say for other restaurateurs, that's a place. If you care about that, that's a place I'm going to take you. I'm going to help you with, right? If you're just here to get a paycheck, then that's okay too. It's just different. There's a lot of restaurants where that you can go and make some kick-ass tips, and you could be all about me and have a great, successful life, and that's fine too. But that was not what I was about and what I wanted to create. And I think that made a difference in why people stay.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because, a lot of restaurateurs come and they say, "Hey, I got a great recipe for you know, such and such dish. Or and I mean, to be clear, you run a pizza establishment and your pizza looks incredible. And you've mentioned that you come from a history, family of foodies, and so there's some food in the blood there. But it's interesting that when I asked you that question, you didn't start with, "Listen, we make the best pizza you've ever had in your life." In fact, that the product that you sell wasn't necessarily what was driving a lot of that and driving the why behind it. It sounds more kind of like a purpose. Like you feel like there needs to be a purpose to this rather than we're gonna win by selling this product. Does do you resonate with that at all? Because that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what you're sharing means that I explained myself good because that's right on. Of course, I mean, I think whatever we choose to do, we got to do it the best we can. I don't care if you're selling widgets or pizza. We have a great recipe, family recipe, our own, our sausage guy in Chicago, Greco Foods, makes our own family recipe, and he won't sell it to anybody else, right? We got a copyright on it; it's proprietary. Our dough we make, all that stuff that you hear, 100% makes a difference. But that's what we do, right? What we do has got to be top notch. Also, why we do what we do has got to be just as important, and that's our purpose, and how we do what we do is also very important. So, and that's our values. I wasn't sophisticated to know, that much about that in the very beginning. So what I shared with you was, what I cared about most in my heart and soul was creating an experience. I went out and found somebody. I read books. I read Howard Schultz's book. I read, I mean, we're talking 1995. So, beginning Starbucks, Whole Foods. I was like, who else, is creating a company where making money is a result versus priority, right? The money comes for sure. Uh, and what I realized is like the money was actually easier than figuring out how do I build a positive culture, right? I had to do some work. I had to go find someone. I found this consultant, Rudy Mick. I don't know if you've ever talked to him. He's an amazing guy, but he taught me a lot. He was a great mentor for me. And then I didn't just say, thank you, Rudy. I actually took everything he said, everything we created our own purpose for our organization, our set of values with his help, right? And then I said, okay, this is life changing. I was like, wow, it's like, this is what I've been looking for. Holy cow, this is amazing. There was tears and all that, it's like, it was meaningful. And I was like, okay, this is going to be systemic, as especially as a carpenter. I started to engineer. How do I make this come to life every day in my business? So I started to engineer that, and I started to put systems in place around, and that's what I want to share with other. It doesn't have to be like this soft, esoteric conversation anymore. To me, I didn't want it to be that way. I wanted it to be as hard, and as objective as our financials, right? That's what I did with our culture.
Can you give me some examples of what those systems are? I mean, thinking about the transition from carpenter to restaurateur, it is challenging. Give me some examples because people hear that those are nice words, but give me an example of what type of system you implemented that made that change and that shift palpable.
So there's a couple key components. One, understanding why we do what we do is separate from what we do, right? So in the purpose, you know, I highly recommend, if any restaurateur do it, any business actually, our purpose is our dedicated family provides this community unforgettable place to connect with your family and friends. They have fun and they feel at home. That sounds long. I just said it, no problem, right? I memorize it. Yeah, that's. And does all of our team memorize it? No. Does some of them do? Yes, right. But they know the essence. That's the most important thing. And there's components to that really I've learned turn it from just some marketing thing that someone puts on their website to actually part of the culture. One, it's got to be stated from a to be statement to a collective I. Like ours starts with our dedicated family, or we believe, or something, right? It's got to be because think about this, Andy. If you were to come to work at Next and our purpose said to provide a great experience, if you're sitting in orientation, by the way, we put this in orientation, right? And we talk about it first thing. You're like, okay, that sounds nice, but who's doing it, right? By having a collective eye, our dedicated family. Now say that to yourself, right? I mean, if you do it silently, right? Feel the difference. It goes from your head, intellectual, to your heart and soul. It's like, oh, I'm part of this now, right? And that's truly why I opened the restaurant, was because of that purpose. And that's why, when we hire people and we get them on board, I don't, we talk about how, so again, the semantics of it is collective I statement, present tense, in the moment, and it's going to be specific. You know, no other restaurant could it feel. I mean, you just heard it, right? Does it feel like every restaurant could have our purpose? I hope not, right? It's unique to us, right? So it's a differentiator. So I suggest anybody who does that work have those components, right? Collective I statement in the present tense. How are you making a difference in the community that's unique for your establishment, right? That's how it's part of this. That's the foundation of the systemic part of it. Then we put it in orientation. Then we speak to it we have it in training, of course. We certify our team members of writing down experiences where they created that in one of our guest experiences before they're certified to be fully fledged Nick's Pizza and Pub team member, right? It's part of the onboarding process, right? So we do that with our purpose, and we also do that with our values. We actually have 12 values, and the team has to write down. They have a little booklet as they're going through their onboarding that they have to write down experiences of one of our values. We treat everybody with dignity and respect. We provide a clean and safe environment, right? We honor the relationships that connect our team, our community, and our guests, right? So those, that's just a few of them, right? Those are, again, I went from these are nice kind of esoterical things to like, wait a sec, this is this is ingredients to our culture. Just like ingredients to our pizza. Yeah, exactly. Um, the team gets tired of me hearing that sometimes. Maybe I don't know. you know. So those again. I'm a practitioner, so I want to share with other restaurateurs. We can make a great culture and organization. We could put it into practice. We could make it systemic, and then the team feels like this is more than a job. That's what I hear over and over. The other parts that we did that really, like when I wrote my book, a slice of the pie about this and interviewed my team, sometimes they would say the values make a difference. A lot of times they said, Nick, our coaching model, which is the other thing we teach our team how to give feedback. We have three types of feedback: a feedback loop, performance feedback, direct feedback. We teach our team how we talk with each other. We have a communication model. So what I would say about those pieces of the system that we have, they're not just, oh, you only use these things working at Next, or you only use these things working at whatever company you're in. Our intentional communication principles to create safe space are life skills. The feedback model is life skills. How to be a coach that we teach are life skills. So again, when people come to work at Nick's, you know, they finish orientation and are like, crap, I get these stories all the time, right? They go home at the end of orientation and they use these things at home and come back and are like, holy cow, my boyfriend, I told my boyfriend, we've been having a struggle with, I don't want him to wear shoes on the rug anymore. And I used the communication tools to help him because he was wearing shoes. And it's like, wow. And my boyfriend's like, wow, you're speaking different. We're not fighting, It's like, well, that kind of stuff. It's like, holy shit, what's it like? Now
Yeah.
I understand what it's like to work in this restaurant. It's going to improve my life. Right.
Yeah, that is so seminal throughout the whole restaurant industry. Is so much of it is life skills.
Yes.
beyond just the food and the life skills of being able to serve guests, being able to interact with team members. I think it's so crucial. It's one of my favorite things about the restaurant industry, because it's just a microcosm of broader life, and it's such a great opportunity for people to, to learn and grow in that. Uh, it's it's interesting. You talked about training, and you've said most restaurant problems are actually training problems to a certain extent. What do you feel like most restaurant owners misunderstand about training, and how would you change how the industry approaches training? Because it seems to be a big part of what you do and what makes Nick's great.
Yeah, well, we have a choice. We could typical P&L on in a restaurant has a line item for help wanted, whatever you call it. Like used to be help wanted ads,
Yeah,
now
right.
it's right. I have to pay for Indeed ads. I have to pay for this. Instead of expensing those, our choice could be, let me invest in training instead. So I'm investing in retention, right? One of the things I learned early on, getting mentored with Rudy around that. And that's where I was like, I'm all in with training. And here's the thing, like, I think what the restaurant misses, the restaurant industry is, and I was guilty of this myself when I first started, is I had in my heart, in my head, I, I'm a competitive, you know, ex-athlete, right? Sports person, right? So I have a high bar for myself and high performance. And I expected that in my restaurant with the guest experience. I have, a high bar, and what we don't do a good job of is defining specifically what that means. So my A plus is explicit. So when someone comes in, we can get an A plus match. You know, what I've learned over the years is there's three things I tell my managers all the time, and I think restaurant guys could, ladies and gentlemen could connect with this, is somebody screws up, right? And during the day, it's usually one of three things. They don't care, they don't know how, or they're not capable, right? They just can't do it, right? Don't care, don't know how, can't do it. Well, if we do a good job interviewing, not that we always do, but most of the time, I think we do a 95% good job of interviewing. So we hire values aligned in our interviewing, right? We're asking questions tied to our values and stuff like that. So we bring on people that care. So for our managers, it's like, okay, you probably throw out the I don't care piece, and it's I don't know how, or I'm just not capable. So now our managers and myself included is like, we got to figure that out. Were they trained? Oh, they were trained and they're missing it. Now I could hold them accountable to the training. I could revisit that training, say, okay, this is the expectation, hold them accountable to it. And that starts the accountability track, right? Or guess what? Oh, we missed putting that in training. Like, especially when we went through the pandemic. It's like, oh, we give away free peanuts. We used to throw peanut shells on the floor, right? Then during the pandemic, we took away the peanuts. We had to change our training, the host task. It was like the hosts weren't all doing the same thing with asking if the people wanted peanuts instead of just giving it to them, right? So again, changing that expectation right away, right? So now I can hold people accountable to excellence. That's what gets missed. Does that explain it very well?
Yeah, it does. I think you talked about excellence. Then how do you define excellence, though? Like, more specifically, right? Because you had, like you mentioned, you have the bar in your head. Is there a method that you're able to take that out of your head and put it onto paper? But, like, how do you do that without overwhelming or micromanaging your team? Like, what's the nuance that happens?
Great question, Andy. Yeah. Well, the first piece is, what's common about common sense? Nothing, right? It's not common. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the first piece, right? Again, when I first started diving into training, and we use a training format called the Art and Science of Service, which I think is great for the service industry, any customer service, actually. Um, how I did that at the time, I had one restaurant. Now with 200 restaurants, just under 200 employees, 9,000 square foot restaurants, right? They're big facilities, very busy. So we could still do this, and I've done this, when we've added pieces of training, but it's still the same process. It's I have my version of excellence. So take host training, for example, right? I have my so when we do training, I'm going to be involved. I'm going to take an A plus, like my top performing host. I'm going to have them involved, and I'm going to have somebody that could take notes and be better than I am about the details about writing stuff out because I'm not that good at that part, right? So
Yeah.
really, it's 3 or 4 people, 3 or 4 people in that position to do the training. That's how you get started, right? And we actually broke the host desk, for example. And I see very rare that I see restaurants ever do this. They have a host and they say, okay, host, right? We have 4 different positions at the host. The first one is the greeter. When the guest walks in, we're going to certify you as a greeter. That means when a guest walks in, you're behind the host desk. You have a greeting. A greeting isn't how many. It's hi, how are you? Welcome, whatever, right?
Yeah.
A smile. We put that in the training, right? So that's just an example of not being common sense. We also have a position of a seater. A seater is going to get trained on what is our expectation about how, when you come to the guest, how do you greet them with the menus? What do you say? Right? Not a script, but bullet points about a genuine greeting. How are you? Love your shirt. Love the purple, looks good on you, Andy. Things like that. Walking them to the pace of walking with them. If we have an older person with a cane, I'm going to walk slow. If I have kids and they're bouncing off the walls, I'm going to walk a little faster, right? That's what we mean by walking in service of our purpose. Walking with a purpose means tied to our guest experience and our purpose. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. And then when I get to the table, we let the guests sit first. Then we put the menus, how we do that. All those details are broken down just in seating, you know, and then we have the filler who's filling the restaurant, right? Managing that seating chart, 350 seats. That's one of the hardest jobs in the restaurant, right? On the headset, talking to the bussers, that table's right, all this stuff, talking to a host corner because we get walk-ins of 30, we get walk-ins of 12 all the time, right? Because we don't take reservations, right?
Yeah. That's right. Bus pulls up.
Yeah. And then the fourth position we have is a host coordinator who is walking the room kind of like an assistant manager, strategizing the big tables, the big groups of sevens, eights, tens, 12s, 15s. So I don't know how many restaurants do you know that actually have 4 different positions just to be a host.
Yeah, just for the host. No, I mean that level of operations is why I saw a stat that was your restaurants are like in the top 10 throughput of pizza restaurants in the country for the amount of throughput you're doing, which is just wildly impressive. But even almost more impressive, I think, a common industry challenge is not just labor, right? That's a general industry challenge, but the types of people that you get in labor, specifically so much of frontline restaurant employees who are doing these jobs in the host. Some of those very complex. Like you talk about the fillers who trying to logistically figure out where can you put, all these different tables and all these different people and how do you fit the Tetris blocks together. A lot of them are teenagers. Teenagers who don't have a lot of work experience. When you talk about defining life skills, this is like, this can be like the hell week of life skills for these teenagers, to use the sports analogy of really building them up in the most kind of in your face, can't ignore it way that they are. When you're at work in a restaurant environment, especially as a young person, you are learning. It sometimes feels trial by fire. When most of your employees are teenagers, how do you then go about getting them to care? Because teenagers, famously will be like, "Oh, I don't care about anything. I'm cool. Whatever." You would pick whatever classic stereotypical teenage attitude you have. Every restaurateur is thinking, "This is my business. This is the culture we want." How do we get those teenagers who have those attitudes to care? And how do you teach leadership, accountabilities, and values to those younger folks who are just entering the workforce, who have to do these, massively important jobs to your operations?
First of all, isn't it a wonderful gift that we in our restaurant industry, we have that opportunity? I mean,
Oh,
to me, it's like that's the way I've always viewed it is like, wow, I get 16, 17-year-olds or 50-year-olds, right?
right.
But especially the younger generation, it's like, wow, we're going to have an impact on their life that they're going to probably, maybe they stay with Nick's and I love when they do, for a career, the restaurant could be the career. Um, but they're going to go on somewhere else and they still have these life skills. So that to me is an awesome gift that we get.
Absolutely.
And then to your question, um, it is, what I think yes, to everything you said. We can do that. We do that. The way I think of it is I think of our business as a school, and that's the structure that we put in our training.
Okay.
Like I said, the host desk or even someone in the heart of the house that's making pizzas and working the grill, each person has to get certified to do their job they were hired for in the onboarding before they're a part of it, right? And then once they get certified in that job, then we have a chart on the wall that shows they can get more certifications and they have a career path. And they start out at 3 certifications, they're a rookie, 3 more, they're a pro, 3 more, they're experts. Some
Awesome.
of some of
Gamer
those,
to a certain extent.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And in more of the hourly team members in the art house, that compensation metrics tied to that, right? Because they're more valuable, from pro to expert. Um, so that's what we've done. And what I see missing in the industry, and I talk to other restaurateurs here in Chicago, great establishments, but some say, I won't hire a teenager, right? I'm
Right.
only going to
I've heard that
hire,
plenty of times.
yeah, and I'm only going to hire in fine dining places. I'm only going to hire people who have a resume built around fine dining. Which is it has some validity to it for sure. My concern is even when we bring on servers with a lot of experience, for example, right, or cooks with a lot of experience, we're still getting someone else's culture. We're still getting someone else's good habits or bad habits. We don't know. It's a risk. So we're going to say, here's our culture. You're going to go, everyone's going to go through orientation. And if you're great, our training isn't about 2 days follow me, 2 days follow you. Our training is a 1 to 5 scale. So we have all the art and science pages that are going to get evaluated, and you got to get all 4s to be certified. So what's beautiful about it becomes objective. It's not time bound. So very experts who have a lot of experience, they're going to get certified in 4 days. A 16, 17-year-old is going to take maybe 10 days. It allows for that difference. And now, if they're a culture match, they're going to go through it quickly and they're going to be up and running and start getting their, and have their own section or be on, the line, whatever they want right away. If not, we have a system to develop someone that takes a little bit longer performance wise, but they're a great culture match. They have our values, they align with our purpose, you know, and that makes a big difference. And what I've seen, Andy, I mean, what's your experience of working with the younger generation? Bad, good? What do you really see?
Yeah, I think in my experience, and I can even flash back to when I was younger, being a teenager, young 20 something, working in restaurants. I mean, but that's how important those moments are. Right? It still sticks with me
Right.
these decades later,
Yeah. Yeah.
where I learned so much of those life skills through there. And there's something about, you mentioned it feel we kind of, it becomes kind of like a school in a certain sense. That's so true that when you work with other young people, or I've worked with young people in restaurants and seen them working there, it becomes like they'll rise to that level of expectation the minute they've bought in. They have the ability to rise, and sometimes they just need that chance. And when you put them into the right you know the right infrastructure, the right process, that whole school environment, right? Like, you don't expect someone to come in and be able to spin dough perfectly or right away. Like, that's just not that's not a reasonable expectation. If you properly train people up, it's amazing to find out what it happens when you give people a chance. And then when those people feel cared for throughout the process and feel as part of that family, adopt that we and our statement that you were talking about, suddenly, you can find that young people especially can be some of the most dedicated employees who are able to be way more flexible, who will lean in because they felt like you actually care. Is everyone going to do that? No. But that's life. That's how it is at any generation that you work with. But I think, being able to cultivate and create your own culture with those young people versus people who've brought in their old, like some other existing set of values, there's a lot of upside there that I think a lot of people shy away from because they don't want to. They get a little worried about the stigma of young people, but I've seen them just rise to the challenge and impress me. I might go in with lowered expectations, and I get usually blown away.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I've seen young people impress me too. And, you know, different than my generation. I'm old enough to be of that, I'm 63, so I'm of that generation of when I went to work when I was younger, I did what my boss told me to do. I didn't, didn't matter if he was modeling or not. If he was chewing gum and he told me I couldn't chew gum, I would not chew gum, and it was fine if he was chewing gum, right? It didn't
Right.
matter, that's
Does
my
not relate
generation.
anymore.
No, it's not. And to your point, that's a great thing. I mean, it's a little harder for managers because now managers have to walk the talk, right? And that's what this generation is so keen to watching for good reasons. Look at the examples in leadership that we have today, right? There's not very good examples in leadership from teachers to whatever, politics or whatever, right? You know, scandals around all this stuff, right? They just don't have the trust in leadership. So they're paying attention. Am I going to a place where the leader is I could trust and he's modeling what he's telling me, he or she is modeling what they expect of me. That's a great thing. And that's what I see. In this generation, I need if I'm chewing gum and I'm telling them not to chew gum, I need to not chew gum, right? Otherwise, they're just going to say screw you, probably
Yeah.
literally flip me off and leave, right?
Right.
And
Right.
that's okay. I think it's just a higher bar for leadership. We need to walk the talk, and then you're going to have amazing young, high performing young people working in your organization that are hungry to just tear it up and have a great experience and do great work. That's the opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like authenticity and transparency becomes really important to getting those folks to care. Which brings me to another point I want to talk about because I think it leads right into there, which is probably what I would suspect is one of your more vulnerable moments in your career. In 2011, your business hit a bit of a roadblock or road bump, if you will, and you took some interesting steps to save your business. Can you walk us through what happened there, and what steps did you take to kind of get through that? Because I think it goes along with what we were just talking about.
Yeah, I guess the big takeaway from that first is what I learned is everything we're talking about here, right? The structure, the system, how I care about creating meaning at work, and the system we put in place helped us be very successful. Helped us with our low turnover, profitability, right? Guest retention, all kinds of things, right? What I also learned is when we went through a really hard time after the recession, on top of, being, the recession hitting us hard, a big road construction development at one of our locations, our Elgin location, in the suburbs of Chicago, that whole road being torn up, it our business was down 60% for the whole summer, right? That almost killed us. And I actually thought it was going to kill us, Um, and all I was vulnerable and transparent about, for one, on the financial side, the beginning of that summer, I had a financial advisor help me with cash flow projections, which all the operators out there, please, if you don't do this, cash flow statement is okay, but it's kind of a dead document. It's a autopsy versus a cash flow projection. Where we're looking at our projected cash flow for the next 3 to 6 months. I started doing that earlier in the year. That helped me get communicate to our team every Friday how we were doing. So we were having the great game of business kind of fiscal huddles every Friday with our team. Just 20 minutes, quick, and we had also had sales goals. The team were involved, right? That's one piece. Then it got worse. Sales got worse in the summer. It was cash flows getting tighter. The other restaurant couldn't keep carrying us. This two restaurants all the time. And I thought, okay, I could see 4 weeks out, we're going to run out of cash. I said, you know what, we're going to have to close the door. And I had one of our meetings, a pre-shift. Restaurants have pre-shifts, right? And told the team, and the team said, wait a second, Nick, we don't want to close. I was telling them we're probably going to have to close.
Is this just managers, or is this like the whole staff, host to cook to server?
Yeah, about 80% of the team that was there on that Friday, right? Um, they said, wait, what about if we tell our guests? Why don't we tell our guests the situation we're going through? And it was their idea. Like, why don't we send out? I go, you know what? You're right. We should do that. I was right, but hesitant. I'm like, and I told our banker about it. And I've been transferring to our banker. They're like, no way, don't do that. Your vendors are all going to ditch you and all this stuff. Well, all the opposite happened. And I did, I didn't listen to our banker. I listened to our team. We communicated that. And we had over 5 weeks, we had 110% increase in sales, right? In both restaurants, lines out the door. That was like a precursor to Kickstarter. It was a version of Kickstarter, I guess, in a way. You know, so that's my point. Is all the things we talked about helped us be successful. All the things we're talking about helped us through a really tough time. Also helped us. The numbers. We're busiest restaurant till COVID hit. Right now, I don't know if we are anymore. I haven't tracked it. Pizza Today hasn't asked us to do a survey. But we're still busy. But I would say we weren't during COVID. Definitely not. And I had just opened a Chicago restaurant, and we had to close that. So again, we had to go through a chapter 11. Andy, this is not Nick talking about everything is beautiful. Over 30 years of being a business, I've definitely had my share of roller coasters. We went through chapter 11, restructured because I personally guaranteed the Chicago restaurant. I wish I could say I didn't have to do that, but like a lot of entrepreneurs, we have to put our own name on the line sometimes. And again, we had to get through that, and the team helped us get through that 100%.
Yeah, that Chicago location. I find that one really interesting because you two such successful locations, and you go for the Chicago location, and it was open for less than a year. Is that
A little more than a year, yes.
a little more than a year? But I mean, a really short time span for a restaurant. Talk to me about more of what you learned there, because that's a tough thing, especially for how personal restaurants are for the owners, especially, you know, and to feel like that quickly to open it and then just say, you know what, this isn't working. We need to close it. That seems really, really hard if I'm putting myself in your shoes. What did that experience teach you about expansion and knowing when to walk away?
Yeah, it's a really important. I know so many people on podcasts talk about all the beautiful things. That was a very hard thing for me, Andy, and I'm glad to talk about it. One, because my dream, I grew up in Chicago. I wanted to we were having such great success in the suburbs, right? And I knew our concept would be successful in the city. And it was in a lot of different ways. And, the impact we were having on the team. We had guests coming in, and it was really building business. What I suck at, Andy, honestly, is picking real estate locations and having, honestly, that's what I've learned in hindsight, right? I got into a out of aligned, lease. In those days, things were great, and so again, I am so passionate that I think sometimes my optimism and my passion is too contagious, and I didn't have anybody on my team to say, Nick, your numbers are too optimistic. You're not giving yourself enough runway. The capital raise that we had wasn't enough to make it. I had 6 months of no profitability in our up front. On top, that wasn't enough. In Chicago, you need a year, and I didn't have a year, and I had too high of a, again, the metric around the rent I was paying was too high for that location. That was a mistake. I didn't have a good team around me to structure in a different way. We could have maybe paid that in a couple of years, but not right off the ground, right? Big mistake. And it breaks my heart. It's probably one of the hardest things I went through because I care so much. I wanted to,
Yeah.
I wanted to bring it back to, in the
Yeah.
neighborhoods, and such a hard thing to do. And I had so much positive, we had so much, from the guest experience stuff, we had so much positive reviews and positive feedback. But if you're not paying attention to the financial side and you over leverage, like that, it's easy to say, I know not to over leverage, and I didn't think I was, you know, and I was. So the real estate part is a really get somebody good, and be conservative on your sales when it comes to structuring the real estate part. I didn't do that very well at all.
Wow. Thank you for that vulnerability and transparency. I think there's a lot of folks who need to hear that. We got time for one more question. And along those lines, I guess it makes me think, if I'm a founder of a restaurant, if a founder of a restaurant, came to you and, they have a business they feel is going really well, and they want to think about scaling across multiple units, but most importantly, scaling their culture across multiple units, where would you tell them to start, and what should they avoid? How would you scale your business from one to many?
Yeah, I think it's I love, love, love that question because what I see, now I have my another business called the Trust and Track Institute, where I teach all this stuff to all kinds of businesses, actually, not just restaurateurs, all industries, because it's applicable to many industries, right? And some of the clients I'm working with is what happens when they don't scale the culture is they implode, right? They start out great, they're making a lot of money, but then the organizational health within the organization starts to fall apart. And to me, it was really important before I grew that I put systems in place to scale the culture. And that can be done. It can be done. It really is by the things I said: authentic, real purpose that has those nuanced specificity in it, putting in, and the important values, creating a system like issue, value, solution, decision making process for the team and the managers, putting it in the onboarding, putting it in the training, creating a business as a school framework, whatever, something like that for yourself. It doesn't have to be exactly like ours, but the key components is the purpose, the values, the training, communication tools. Those are the really key components to scaling the culture. Making that systemic is very possible and attainable. Know exactly how to do it now. It's a recipe to success, to me, a key component.
That's awesome. So, in closing, can you give us what are your top 3 books that restaurant owners should read this year?
Wow. So many good ones. I read a ton, so I'm trying not to just think of the one I just read or whatever, right?
Use
Um, yeah, like I love the Fearless Organization, but I would say one of the key ones that really kind of put my brain around the structure, scaling culture was Built to Last by Jim Collins. It's a oldie but goodie, phenomenal, much better than any of his books, in my opinion. Built to Last is great. I would say Resident Leadership, because it ties, Daniel Goleman's work around emotional intelligence is really important, and we teach emotional intelligence. Resident Leadership is a little more practical around how to actually apply emotional intelligence. There's also another emotional intelligence book, actually, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, that I think does a pretty
Yes,
good job too. a third one for restaurateurs. Good job. That's what it's called.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
You know that book?
yeah.
Because I can't remember her name, the author. Yeah, it's like a not a normal.
I know which one you're talking about, though. That's a good one.
Yeah, but she did studies around successful, that uh, grocery store chain in Brazil, the gas station chain that's all around the South. I've never been to, but anyhow, good research. Good practical steps of how we could apply things. Reading these books, you could apply stuff from those books to our business because that's how I learned. So I'm happy to share that stuff. And of course, get in touch with me if go to my website, Trust and Track Institute. um, reach out to me on my LinkedIn or whatever. I'm happy to share and a whole bunch of books as well, or our own teachings, whatever you want people like. Yep.
Awesome. We'll add all those links right here in the show notes so folks can find it.
Okay.
Nick, this has been an absolute pleasure. I have loved talking with you. Thank you so much for your vulnerability, your positivity, and for just being in the fight for all of us who just love seeing restaurants grow and more people enjoy food and fellowship. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Restaurant Reset is sponsored by Genius for Restaurants, the modern point of sale system from Global Payments. Genius helps you reach your most important goals, whether that's simplifying your operations, speeding up your checkouts and table turns, easily expanding into new locations, or building loyalty with guests. To find out more, visit globalpayments.com/genius.